Hi, Dylan. You surviving?
Yes, thriving.
Okay, so you still have to go to class tomorrow. You can't ditch and start fall break early, but you made it to fall break, so congratulations. Um, try and some of you I know have talked to you about stress of midterms this semester. Some of you have midterms this semester. Some of you do it next week, not semester, week, next week. But hang in there, you'll get through it. Freshmen, you have survived almost an entire half semester of college. Congratulations.
And a semester of music theory.
Yes. All right, so I in my never-ending quest to get you all to actually finish recital attendance, I sent you an email today. Most of that's for music ed majors. You have those extra 6 that you have to do, so I'm trying to make sure that you know how to get those music ed requirements that are outside of this building. This weekend, if you're still around, there's going to be a really cool Johnson City Symphony Orchestra. Johnson City Symphony Orchestra and Symphony of the Mountains, either one. They're both always free for students. It's in this building, in the Grand Hall. That's 7:30 on Saturday night. And a lot of your own faculty members are playing in that. I think all of the brass faculty are playing in this one. So please come out and watch them if you can. You can get a ticket at the box office right before it starts. They're free. Next week, let's see. Oh, and tonight, vocal people, you should be in the Grand Hall tonight to support your friends and colleagues and piano people for the opening band's concert is tonight, 7:30. Okay, so wind ensemble concert band. We'll talk about the rest of these next week. Next week during Symposium, we have a really interesting guest artist. Not that everybody's not interesting, but he is on campus this whole semester. His name is Jason Davis, and he's going to talk to you about his art that he does and combines his awareness for ecology and the environment and how he translates that to his musical performances. I just want you to think ahead. He's going to talk in Symposium on Thursday, and then he's giving a concert here on next Friday night. So if you can mark both of those down, I think you'll really be interested in what he has to say. And it's a very unique perspective on how you can incorporate social consciousness into performance. So come check him out next Friday. Then there's a whole lot going on, not this weekend, but the next weekend. How many of you are involved in the Bands of America performance? Anyway, okay, how many of you are involved in the choir alumni concert? All those are happening on the same day, on October 15th. You probably can't go support each other, but if you can, October 15th is going to be a crazy day here. And then Sunday, October 16th, we have what everybody's been waiting for 4 years, David's senior recital. Anything else anybody wants to announce about performances, recitals, or things that we should go to? Yeah.
Platinum and I will be playing a concert on October 23rd at First United Methodist Church. So first part is going to be classical, second part is going to be Tunisian and some jazz. So please save the date and come support it.
Awesome. We will send that out.
Yes.
Original composition.
Oh, cool. Nice. We'll send that out in an email also. Some of you asked about you have a flyer or a poster for an upcoming event. You can put those downstairs. There's a little magnet board in the student workroom. It's not very big. If you run out of space with that, we can put some stuff on the wall there too. But I know we don't have event boards in the lobbies anymore, but you can put those downstairs in the student workroom so everybody can see that. You can use those. Any other questions, concerns, comments? Are we good? It got cold, and now it's beautiful outside. I know we all want to be outside, so I encourage you to do 2 things over fall break. First, make sure you take time to relax, recover your brain, but also don't relax the entire time and do nothing. So get ahead on homework and projects. It's going to help you in the end be less stressed on the backside of fall break. So use your brain, but also don't stay inside the whole time. Get outside, relax, try and get out of the classroom, enjoy the weather, and then we can come back next Wednesday and we're going to kick this off and finish this semester. If you looked at the original schedule, today was supposed to be a guest artist named Connie Ellisor. She is unable to be here today, but I'm actually super excited about who we got instead. So we're going to split this today between our theory composition team. So I'm going to let them take it away. This is, many of you have Professor Grusser as your Theory 1 professor. So she's going to talk to us a little bit about her research in video game music. Here we go.
Awesome, thank you. Bear with me, I'm talking into the mic, which is very new to me. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Professor Grosser. I'm teaching Theory 1 and Theory 2 this year, as well as Fundamentals. In addition to being a music theory teacher, I'm also working on my PhD in music theory. So I'm currently a PhD candidate, which means that I'm writing my dissertation. And to that end, I am writing a dissertation that investigates the role of the soundtrack in open world video games. So I'm exploring the cognitive nature of the congruence and incongruence between music and what happens on the screen. I'm talking about how music carries information to the player and influences how they make decisions in the game. And then I'm also considering the role of prior experience in gaming amongst all of that. So this work really heavily draws from two fields in music theory, and those are gesture analysis and embodied cognition. And so if you're interested in either of those, I can chat for hours about them, but I also have a bunch of resources that I'm willing to pass on to you guys if that's something, especially upperclassmen, if you're interested in honing in on like a smaller section of music theory. But today I'm going to focus on two games that I've worked on in the past couple of years. The first one is Crypt of the Necrodancer. The second one is Minecraft. And I've chosen these two because they have very different applications of their music in game. And so we can kind of compare how the different musics affect players differently as they're playing these games. They are very different games as well. So to begin, imagine the following scenario. You've fallen into an underground labyrinth. You don't know where you are and you're completely alone. You try to explore, but you quickly discover that your footsteps are bound to the beat of your heart. You're constrained to walk in time with your heartbeat. So your anxiety rises, your heart rate increases, and then you have to walk faster. If you calm yourself down and your heartbeat decreases, you have to walk more slowly. This is basically the premise of this roguelike video game called Crypt of the Necrodancer. This is a game that requires the player to move to the beat of the music in procedurally generated dungeons that are riddled with just dancing enemies that you need to battle to get through. So the player plays as a character named Cadence, and that is not the only music joke in the game. And basically, she's the daughter of a famous treasure hunter who's gone missing. And so while she's searching for her father, she falls into this crypt, which is controlled by the Necrodancer, who steals her heart and forces her to challenge his minions to retrieve it. She's forced through the crypt's dungeon, but her actions being tied to the beat of the music means that she is constrained. She can't just walk around, right? So the beat is understood as the beating of her heart, and she has to retrieve her heart in order to defeat the Necrodancer. There's a couple of different characters that you can play in the game. Each one adds a little bit more to the story. And you can also upload your own music to it, which is really cool. My friends and I actually uploaded our own music and made our own mod, where we had like remixes of our college alma mater, and all of the mini bosses were like conservatory professors. The final boss was the director of the conservatory. So it was a lot of fun. So I want to show you just a brief clip of this so you have a good idea of what we're talking about here. independent agency in relation to the music. It's constrained as to where the player can move, or when the player can move, but not where, right? So many music scholars have theorized about musical agency, drawing perspectives from fields like cognition, semiotics, and musical meaning, but very few have explored musical agency in relation to ludic or game agency. That's a gap that I'm hoping to fill with my dissertation. So I'm going to explore in this portion, this game, how the multimodal nature of Crypt of the Necrodancer influences the player's experience. First, I'm going to outline a couple of different theories of agency, including, and then I'm going to go ahead and analyze the agents in Crypt of the Necrodancer, specifically the different elements of the game that you interact with as a player. I'm going to use these analyses within the framework of those theories of agency that I'm going to talk about to see if we can create a theory or a hypothesis about how the player identifies with the character in the game and constructs this virtual co-experiencing relationship. So while there's many theories of agency, I'm going to take this out because I need to walk. So while there's many theories of agency, I'm going to focus specifically on 3 of them. The first one is called distributed agency, and the idea with, hello? Okay. The idea with that is that agency is distributed from the self to another. That can be another person, an item, your instrument, for example, or in this case, the avatar in the video game. So we're talking about how the player can identify and co-experience with the avatar. Before we get too far ahead of ourselves, agency is a word I'm going to drop a lot, so we want to know what it is. Agency is the relationship between a person and a course of action and those effects that come from that course of action. So basically, agency is I can pick up this water bottle and the water bottle moves up. I have agency over the water bottle. I cannot pick up this piano. I do not have agency over the piano. Distributed agency is when multiple agents, so multiple items, are active and share the elements of agency. So I play a violin. I can make sound come out of the violin, but I need the violin as well. My agency is distributed through the bow to make the strings sound. One of the other theories I'm going to talk about is the mimetic hypothesis by Arnie Cox. He focuses on a neurological foundation and cognitive research that supports the theories of agency. And specifically, he talks about mimetic motor action and mimetic motor imagery. Those sound very similar. Mimetic motor action is actually copying what someone does. I raise my hand, you raise your hand. Okay, so that would be mimetic motor action. Mimetic motor imagery, I raise my hand, you imagine what it's like to raise your hand, but you don't actually do it. Right? In your head, you can say, okay, I know what it feels like to raise my hand. You see me raise my hand, you know what that action is, but you're not overtly doing it. Part of how we understand each other is through these different mimetic actions. This is all related back to childhood psychology, where kids mimic their parents. But also we can extend that a little bit. Part of how we understand music is by imitating the observed sound-producing actions of the performer. Okay? So what that means is, if I'm playing a violin, you can see me bowing the instrument. And you know that if I press harder, it's going to make a louder, crunchier sound. If I'm pressing softer and using little bows, you can think about, you can imagine how that sound is going to be effective. And then the last theory that I'm going to focus on is Robert Hatton's theory of virtual agency. So he specifically looks at Western art music, very specifically, he looks at Schubert, Beethoven, and Haydn. And he looks at how the listener-performer as one agent, so as a listener, I'm also a performer, as a performer, I'm also a listener, and how you experience both sides of that as a musical agent. And this can be applied to the avatar and the player in a video game, because as an avatar, you are hearing things, but also as a player, you're controlling that avatar. There's this distribution of what's going on between yourself and the avatar. And when I say the avatar player, I'm talking about the person who's playing the game and their distributed control or distributed agency into the avatar. So he grounds this theory in musical meaning with a specific application to classical music. And there's a couple of different levels at which you can understand music you're listening to. You can just recognize it, it's there, you hear it. You can understand the effect, you can feel the effect, and then you can experience the effect. A lot of this is related to gestural analysis, and that's a lot of stuff that Hatton does, as well as gestures in musical forces. That is a whole other theory that we don't have time to talk about, but it's a really, really interesting theory. If you're interested in that, let me know. So, moving on to Crypt of the Necrodancer specifically. There are a couple of different agents in Crypt of the Necrodancer. The first one is the character, or the avatar player, right? This cadence girl who we all act as if we are playing the game. And we've already talked about how the Necrodancer steals her heart, and she is bound to the beat of her heart to defeat these monsters, go through these challenges that the Necrodancer, the bad guy, is forcing her to do. The dungeon is divided into 4 different levels, and each level is then divided into 4 more levels. And so the music in the game is aligned with these different levels so that it gets faster and more complex as the game moves on. It makes it harder for you to stay in time with the beat. So in addition to the avatar player, we have the music. Like I was just saying, it increases in tempo, gets more difficult, more syncopation. There's more obscuring of the beat as you continue through. I'm going to focus on instrumental agency in music because it's instrumental music. You can absolutely apply this stuff to vocal music. I know there's a lot of vocalists here. So this is all relevant regardless of the type of music you're looking at. It's just that video games don't often use vocal music really. Here's some. Right. The next agent we have are monsters, and they have a kind of obvious role in the game, and that is to stop the avatar player from making it through the crypt. Each monster has its own looping pattern that determines how the avatar player needs to attack. So if the avatar player tries to attack when the monster is moving, they're going to take damage. But if the monster is not moving when you attack, you will not take damage, you'll give damage. So there's 4 levels of monsters that the avatar player needs to face throughout each level. We have your standard monsters, which you face a lot of, that are up here on the screen. You also have mini bosses. They're a little bit more difficult, one at the end of each level, each floor. And then there's larger bosses at the end of each level of the dungeon. I'm not going to show pictures of those spoilers, but they're scarier than these. And then the last agent is the environment. The environment is interesting because not only is it procedurally generated, which means you never experience the same thing more than once. Every time you play through the game, it's going to be slightly different. But also, parts of the environment can come alive and attack you. So it's not just a passive agent. It will actually actively interact with you. So we have traps that can bite you. We have the walls that'll come alive and start running around the room and attacking you. Some of these things cause damage. There's some traps that will drop you through the floor, and then you have to fight the final boss for when you're not prepared for it. And then there's others where you can find like hidden treasures and good things, tools to help you kind of work your way through the game. So it's interesting because you kind of have to weigh your odds. Like, oh, is this trap going to eat me, or is it going to give me a really good weapon? So the next example we have here is from the first level of the first floor of the first level of the game. Notice that you'll see these different traps floating around. You'll see that when the character runs over what looks like a fast forward button, the music increases, and then you need to then follow along with the music, and so on. So you'll see a couple of the ways that the environment interacts with the game here. an important role in the gameplay, which we can see, it's worth taking the time to like really dig in and see what these key characteristics are of the soundtrack. Like I said, the soundtrack was designed to vary in tempo and rhythmic complexity the further you get into the dungeon. And this can be seen in a comparison between the first song that we just listened to, Disco Descent, and the fifth song, which is called Grave Throbbing from Zone 2, Level 2. So this is a image of this transcription that I wrote for Disco Descent. We can see that it's at a pretty brisk, or we can hear that it's a pretty brisk march tempo at 115 beats per minute, and it has this time-keeping bass line that you can see circled there, and it goes throughout the entire thing. Right? We just have nice even eighth notes throughout the entire thing in 4/4 time, really clear where the player should be moving, and you can really just hear that throughout. On the other hand, with Grave Throbbing, we have a much faster tempo. It's still in 4/4, but we've got 140 beats per minute, and it's all syncopated. There's syncopated bass lines, which obscure the downbeats. And that just makes it that much more difficult for the player to know where they're supposed to be moving, where they're supposed to be stepping, because you can't hear the bass line really giving out to you. So hopefully this will play. Oh, there's one. Okay, there we go. These variations in tempo create what we call affective zones. So within each game zone, there's one steady pulse, which seems to create a more continuous zone of effect, meaning that it affects the player in a consistent way throughout the level. However, even within the game zone, different degrees of intensity evoke an internalized sense of anxiety in the player or the avatar player, in addition to the technical difficulties that are posed by the rhythmic syncopations and the tempo variations, and as well as your restrictions on movement. And then, in addition to all of this stuff about agency, the music also just sets the tone of the environment, right? It's a EDM, right? It provides a high level of activation, getting players into the groove of dancing their way through the crypt. And this groove also creates a sense of intensity and forward motion, right? It encourages the player to continue through the level because the player has learned the song is going to end, and if it ends, you drop through the floor, and you're going to be facing something you are not prepared to face. So looking back at Disco Descent, in addition to the tempo constraints and the fact that there's a very clear beat that we can follow, there's a couple of other agential interactions that occur. If you look at the first line right here, we can see a bit of a modified lament bass. That represents the descent into the crypt. Disco Descent with a descending bass line. The syncopation in the melody creates a sense of urgency, but it doesn't quite foster anxiety in the player the way that it does in the next song that we looked at. This urgency is kind of pushing you forward and encouraging you to explore the environment. And then while the player is exploring the environment, since it's a backgrounding of the music and the gameplay allows for it to really influence the avatar player. It's right there at the center of your attention. So the music requires you to be constrained to the beat, which could really become a disruptive agent, right? If you're really, really focused on the music, you're probably not focusing on other stuff. But because it becomes this thing that you entrain to, you have a habitual reaction to it, it actually pulls the character or pulls the player into the game a little bit more, increasing their embodiment with the character and with the music. In addition to the music, the soundtrack has sound effects as well that create a more realistic diegetic world, diegetic meaning in-game. And so most actions have a sound that go with them. If you miss a beat, it makes sound, you get hit, you fall through the floor, you attack something, something attacks you, you beat a boss. Those are all different sounds that have relation to what you're doing in the game. And then there's also distinctive boss sounds, which allow you to hear what's coming for you before it actually comes for you. And then you can make plans. What weapons do you need? Where can I saw this really cool weapon over here. I want to go back and get it because I know that this really hard boss is coming. So we have cues to the avatar player in that sense, in that it tells you what's coming for you. And we have these reward punishment sound effects with your actions. So let's move on to, I'm going to skip a couple of slides here because they're boring. Okay, let's move on to a completely different game. So we saw how in Crypt of the Necrodancer, the music is really working specifically with the player, right? It's really trying to create these multiple agents, multiple levels of agency that work to bring the player of the game to experience this co-experiencing relationship or a virtual subjectivity with the avatar. The interactions between the avatar player and the soundtrack creates this multi-agental narrative, with each agent adding to the experience in a really unique and important way. So while one would experience a level of engagement with just one of these items present, with just the visuals or just the music, by putting them together, it really pushes the relationship between the avatar and the player from these sympathetic and empathetic engagements to this co-experiencing. So this is a very typical example of how music is used in video games. Minecraft, on the other hand, is a very atypical example. So this is actually pulled from a chapter of my dissertation, hence the title there. And I chose it specifically as a foil to my argument because it's used so atypically. So some questions, these are similar to what we were talking about before. How does music typically create meaning in game events, like it does in Crypt of the Necrodancer? What cognitive phenomena are involved in the creation of meaning? Why do different players experience music in Minecraft differently? And what implications does this different application of music have for the experience in Minecraft? I imagine that many of you have played Minecraft, right? Raise your hand if you have. Yeah, okay. So raise your hand if you like the music in Minecraft. Raise your hand if you don't.
Your opinion's valid.
Do you mute the music? Do you mute the music when you play? Yeah. Me too.
I used to do that.
It depends. Okay. So you have agency to mute the music. So let's take a little look at some gameplay. This one's actually me playing, the other one was not me. This game was developed in 2011. The music originally is by Danny Rosenfeld, and he's better known by his stage name C418. And it's, as many of us seem to know, an open world sandbox game where the player explores this landscape that's completely pixelated and creates their own projects with materials that are available to them. So while the basic necessities of creating a shelter and avoiding death by environmental challenges of the game are standard for all playthroughs, further gameplay is completely dependent on the character, or on the player. I was joking with one of my students earlier, like, oh, you haven't beaten Minecraft, but you don't have to beat Minecraft. It doesn't matter if you beat Minecraft, because So the game could theoretically go on forever. Probably most people don't do that. Most people will get bored of a world, or it's like, I really want to go to this jungle biome and it's like 5,000 blocks away and I'm not dealing with that. So you just create a new world and start over. Because the narrative of the game is so open-ended, the music is not designed to work within the player-generated events of the game. So in an interview, in a 2014 interview with The Guardian, Rosenfeld said that the music being minimalist and melancholic was unavoidable because Minecraft, quote, has a terrible sound engine. That's not true. He also believed that this visual atmosphere probably made people expect an 8-bit or chiptune music, and he intentionally avoided this. I forgot to say that. He intentionally avoided this. He wanted to do something unexpected. So he worked with this experimental, simplistic, acoustic music that doesn't actually tell you anything about the game. He said that Minecraft is a game about making stuff, and the music provides a peaceful sonic play space that fosters this creative atmosphere. He also wanted it to be unobtrusive enough to be easily just kind of phased out, right? He almost hoped that the player would only notice it when something interesting was happening in the game. That way the player automatically identifies the music with events that they themselves created. So I will continue to talk about what I think about this, but also what other people think about this, right? I can't just be like, oh, this is just not right, and call it a day. That's not exactly scholarly. So we'll look at a couple of comments that were left on gaming forums, so Reddit, Twitch, and YouTube, that have contrasting reviews of the music in the game, and they range from loving it to absolutely hating it. So those of you, I know there were a few of you, very few, who didn't like the music. You are not alone. There's a very vocal crowd out there. One caveat is that most people who are ambivalent are not posting their opinions online. So we don't really have many people who are like, oh, music's fine, it's great, whatever. You only have the really positives and the really negatives because you don't, announce to the world that you're ambivalent. So, drawing on previous research in video game, I also suggest that players generally associate music with in-game events only when the music is congruent with those events. So like in Crypt of the Necrodancer, the music was congruent with how you were moving, which created that pull into the game. Whereas Rosenfeld says that you're going to associate the music with what you created. If that's not congruent, it creates a bit of this cognitive dissonance in the game and kind of pushes the player out of their immersion. Some people are okay with that and others are not. So I explore the interaction here between immersion, agency, locus of control, and emergent control, which I'll explain. And the interactions between these psychological phenomena will help us to understand why different players have such disparate experiences with the music in this game. So players on gaming forums have reported completely contrasting ideas about the music. Those who really like the music typically say that because the game is about atmosphere and creativity, the music perfectly encapsulates that. It's more of an environmental sound. They're looking at the large-scale picture. Right? They notice how it fades in and fades out unexpectedly, and 90% of the time it's just kind of silent. You're doing your thing, and then a nice little piano ditty comes in. And then lastly, I have one more that says the soundtrack is made for single-player exploration. It's a real treat when you're just looking around at the vast emptiness around you. With the caveat, as long as you don't have a horde of undead chasing you while the soothing piano plays in the background. Meanwhile, other players have very different reactions to the game, one of either confusion or distaste, so much so that many people mute the music. I myself mute the music. I have several people here who have said they're frustrated with the music. There's virtually no music, and when it is, it's only the same two songs. People on forums ask, how do you fix that? And then the responses are generally, you don't fix it. There was never ever present music. The music has always started and stopped randomly. Others have vented that usually everyone that plays Minecraft just turns off the music. Of course, usually everyone is probably their friend group. And it's the complete opposite for games like Terraria or Crypt of the Necrodancer, where without the music, in these games functions allows us to determine how the music in Minecraft aligns and differs from these standards. The music in open world games, unlike Crypt of the Necrodancer, is usually unfixed, meaning that it depends on what is going on in the game. It's typically linked to setting or to player action. So the music, the sound effects, and the dialogue all work together to draw the player into the game. Different types of music are used to set the environment, convey development, and provide information for the player. So in open world games, you can typically categorize the music into a couple of subtypes. This is not exclusive. So you have interior music if you're in a house or something, exterior music if you're out watching the aurora, stingers are like little cues, and then time of day. Oftentimes the music will change with the time of day. So as I mentioned previously, the music in Minecraft doesn't correlate with specific player actions. The music will appear in every player's game and differently. So I can't describe exactly how it happens for everyone, right? What I've done for this project is I took many hours of gameplay recordings and watched them all and made spreadsheets. And literally, music starts at this time code. Music ends at this time code. This is what the player was doing. This was the time of day. This was the biome. This was the setting. It was tedious. But it was really interesting because then you start to see patterns, right? The whole idea of analysis is finding patterns. So the examples that I have here are examples from gameplay recordings that I either gathered from myself or from peers in December of 2021. And only one track out of the 10 hours of recording that I had from 3 individual players occurred more than once for all 3 players. That track happened to be called Danny, which is the name of the composer. So a little bit, I don't have any proof on that, but it was an interesting correlation. There are a couple of others where it was like 2 players shared it, but not the third. And then a couple where only 1 person showed that track. So in order to compare, I had to pick the ones where they were consistent across all 3 players. So the first one I'll show you is Clark. It's a diatonic minimalist track organized by layering of musical lines to create a texture and harmonic interest. In the excerpt I analyzed here, the music began as the player was fighting a creeper. So the slow open chords really stand in stark contrast to the tense gameplay moment. Do we not have sound? Oh no. There we go. So you can see that you can, or you can hear that you can hear like sheep in the background, meaning that they were close by. You hear zombie cues, meaning that they were also nearby, they were close, but they weren't in sight. Those are all things that could, give you information about the game, right? There's a zombie nearby, I need to know that. There's a sheep nearby, probably don't need to know that, but it adds to the environment of the game. The music does fade away as the player continues to explore the cave, and it just kind of fades out. Nothing really changed in the gameplay, the music just kind of stopped. So in addition to this instance, where the music is present but incongruent with the game, I want to describe several circumstances where the music is not present during important gameplay moments. One of those is finding diamonds. So finding diamonds is a huge achievement in the game. It pops up with a little flag that says, "You found diamonds, congratulations." But also that's like the strongest material at this point before some of these new updates that you could use to create weapons and armor. So it's a very, very big deal. But there's no music attached to it. What we do have, we have a little cue with a ding that says says that you've gained experience, and it has a flag. So we know that in the coding of the game, there's actually something in there that says this is the first time they found diamonds, but there's no musical connection to that. So it's a bit anticlimactic. Please don't search my username. In addition to that, we also have when you find a village. Again, there's coding in the game where if you're within a certain number of blocks, the villagers will spawn. If you're not within that area, they won't be there because it prevents them from just dying randomly. So the fact that there is this cue that tells us in game, okay, you've approached a village, we need to spawn the NPCs, the non-player characters. There's no music tied to that. You just kind of walk. So we can see that Minecraft shares the values of music in open world games. It is ambiguous, it is reflective of the environment, but it's not telling you anything about the specific things that are happening in the game. So while some people are okay with that, it's like, okay, there's a horde of zombies chasing me and there's a pretty melodic line in the background, it doesn't break their immersion. Some people it really will. And that's related to your what we call locus of control, which is basically if you feel that your actions should have consequences. People who think that their actions should have direct consequences are often broken out of their immersion by this incongruent music. So we can see that that Minecraft is a bit of an outlier among open world games, in that its music occurs randomly and sporadically. It's inconsistently connected with elements of the setting, such as time. There's a sunrise, sunset music, but it doesn't happen every time the sun rises and sunsets. And in typical open world games, this binding of music to setting and game events helps to create this immersive experience for the player. And that's not something that Minecraft is doing. We have to create the immersion for ourselves. So amongst these different types of players, different people who like it or don't like it, it seems that the reason for that is related to how they think that their actions should have consequences, and if the music is a consequence they think that their actions should have. So for many players, the lack of effect in the game world of their actions breaks the sense of agency and jeopardizes their immersion in the game world. So, basic summary. Sorry, Neil, I'm kind of going over on you. So, basic summary is that the congruence of music in a game, so congruence, the music that's happening matches what's happening on the screen, matches what you're doing, and gives you information about what's going on in the game world, is a really effective way for music to create a good experience for the player, to pull them into this game, create an immersion. A lot of analysis can be done with this, and I know usually when you expect a music theory presentation, you don't expect video games. But there is actually a lot of analysis that goes into this, specifically gestural analysis. If the melodic line goes up, what's going on in the game to make the melodic line go up? The melodic line going down, is the player falling, and stuff like that. So if you guys have any questions about particularly the music and how it relates to the game, I'm not very good when it comes to coding. I can read we do it. Feel free to let me know. I think, are you cool if we take questions, Neil?
Yeah.
Cool. If you guys have any questions here, I'm happy to answer them. If they're insane, really long answers, we can set up a meeting and chat about it.
So, I had a question about, we talked about an open world game that has more of an aimless feel to it. You can do whatever you want in it. And then we also talked about a game that directly is affected by the music. But one thing that I was thinking about, you know Mike O'Donnell, correct?
Yeah.
The Halo soundtrack guy. So Halo is a game that is story driven, and it's like you're playing out a movie. You're directly affecting the cinematic event, and you have to meet that event to get the objective and complete the game. Well, he talked about the sparsity of music and making it to where it can go quiet sometimes, but there are very specific cues that, like when the character hits a certain part of the level, the music kicks up and it's go time. So how does that fit in with a lot of this other stuff? So.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So just to repeat for anyone in the back, he's asking about how in Halo you have this cinematic narrative that you have to follow, and there's specific cues in which the music will be ramped up to kind of indicate to the player, like, yeah, it's time to go. But there are also moments where it can be really sparse and quiet. I think that that's a really good example of like a typical application of music in a video game. Unlike Minecraft, where it's just kind of random, there's no cues. What they're doing in Halo is they have codes in the game that say, okay, this player got to area A, and in area A, something important needs to happen, so we're going to ramp up the music. And that is a form of congruence with what's going on in the game. Does that answer that? Cool.
In your findings of this study, have you found the rhythmical aspect or the melodic aspect being more important to immersion?
It depends on the type of game. So there are games where rhythm is specifically the foregrounded element, like in Crypt of the Necrodancer, where you have to follow the rhythm and you have to follow the beat in order to move. I find that in games where that's not the case, they're pretty much equal. Rhythm will generally create more of a sense of mood. So it'll like a faster tempo will increase your anxiety, a slower tempo will decrease your anxiety. But the melody then will allow for a little bit more nuance in what that mood is, right? You can have a calm mood that's happy, but a calm mood that's sad, right? You can have an anxious mood that's up-paced and exciting, or you can have an anxious mood that's scary. So they kind of work together to make a little bit more nuance in the feel. Yeah.
So in your research, have you looked into the mental aspect of maybe why the immersion's broken? Because our minds love that like risk and reward, like I make a choice and now I have reward and now I feel good about it, or is it more or less just a different aspect of it?
So it really depends because each person experiences the risk and reward differently. So for many people, the direct effect of sound to their actions is not as important as the visual effect. Like if you click the button, X happens, but it doesn't need to have a sound effect with it. For many people, the opposite is true. That sound effect makes it even stronger of a connection. And for those people, often having incongruent music breaks the immersion, especially if it's inconsistently congruent. I've had a lot of people report that it's like, oh yeah, the sun rises and sometimes music plays. Would you want to hear the same music every time the sun rose in the morning? And I'm like, I do. My alarm goes off every morning. So like some people, it's not as important of a factor as it is for others. And why I can't really speak to. I think that would involve a little bit more like brain imaging studies, which I'm not really working on. Partially because you can't put someone in an MRI and have them play video games. It just doesn't work. You can't sit still. But when that technology comes around, I'll let you know. In the back.
Is that like, brain imaging sort of thing, or like monitoring brainwaves sort of thing, something that you would hope would
be an expansion on your research in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. So EEGs we can do, and eye tracking we can do because you don't need to sit still for those. But functional MRI specifically is something where you need to be sitting still, and you just can't get the same experience. It's the same as like watching movies. You get a little bit closer of an accurate response for fMRIs while watching movies because you can sit still. But even just moving your hands in an fMRI will skew the results. So yeah, hopefully that's something that will come with time and technological advancement that is way, way beyond my expertise though. Okay, yes. Yeah.
Okay, just one more question. So, like, this is more of a question for your opinion. So with Minecraft, it's an open world game where the music just kind of does its own thing. Well, Fallout 4 is another open world example, and that music is congruent with the actions of the characters, and that's why I turned it off. Because while I'm walking through the open world, I've played this game for like 2,000 hours. I'm a master of it. But
Sounds like you would too.
but in the game, it's like you're fighting a lot. Like you just walk somewhere and they're like, "Hey, I don't like you. You smell bad. You shoot me." Like it's so. It would be like a very similar soundtrack every time, the same. So I think that by and large, for open world games, I don't think that's a great idea.
That's interesting. So I find the exact opposite with a game like Skyrim, for example, where you're not constantly fighting, but when you are, it's important to you to hear that. So I think it probably definitely depends on your context, right? If you're in like an FPS or a first-person shooter, having music that goes along with, a fight you're just gonna have fight music the entire time, right? So not having any contrast that creates like this, it's like the effect of like you're wearing your socks, but you don't notice your socks, right? Because they're there all the time. You don't notice them unless they're bothering you, right? It's the same with music. If music is constantly the same and there's no change, you're not going to notice it. So in that case, because it would be the same all the time, it's less effective. But when there is a contrast, when you're not fighting all the time, but there is a cue to tell you when you are, that's a really effective way of using music to portray information. It's a good point, though. Hello? Boom. No, battery's good. I saw a hand. Yeah.
So, what's your favorite game? What's your favorite game because of the music? What's your favorite soundtrack? And in which game, like, because of the music, the last scene in the story, like, was so memorable? Three questions. Yeah.
My favorite game, because of the music, is Legend of Zelda.
Which one?
Pick one. Any of them. I really, really like the original soundtrack. But the way that in Breath of the Wild they orchestrated it to make it more modern is really cool. I can definitely appreciate that. But I like the simplicity of the original soundtrack in terms of technology, but the complexity of the music regardless. Favorite game generally? Minecraft. Yeah, I really like playing Minecraft, but I do use music. And then was the third one favorite soundtrack oh no, the last scene. Oh.
Because of the music.
What about, I'm gonna say second to last scene. So in Breath of the Wild, when you're coming up to the castle, and it has this variation on the original Zelda theme. It's the first time you hear the original Zelda theme in the game. So the fact that it brings it in at that point when you're like approaching the final boss is a really cool effect. Neil, are you okay if I keep taking questions? All right. Yeah.
This isn't a question. It's more like your opinion. Have you ever played Outlast?
No.
Oh,
I've not played
you
that.
should know a good immersion.
Okay.
Hannah.
About the effect on the player when a game has music that is tied to actions of the character environment. What can you say to give them and more?
So I'm gonna go with typically. Typically those events are related to each other, right? You're not going to often you're not going to be in like this really calming environment and then at the same time be in battle, right? So oftentimes that compounding effect is all compounding towards the same goal, in which case it creates a stronger effect. There are isolated instances when your environment does not match what you're doing in the game, and that I think also works towards creating cognitive dissonance that the game is aiming for, which is when you're expecting one thing but another thing is happening. It just kind of doesn't quite fit. And when if the musics are both going at the same time, it makes it kind of stumbly. It enhances that like it doesn't fit feeling. Yeah.
Sorry, quick follow-up. What would you say that the order of those events in those environments is important or not?
Yes, definitely. Say you're in an environment where there is this cognitive dissonance, and say that you're in a dream floating on a cloud, and next thing you know, a dragon's attacking you. Right? And you have the music for this dream floating on the cloud and the music for the dragon attacking you. If you start off with just that calm environment, it really startles you, right? When the dragon or attack music comes in. The other way around, if you're fighting something and then you suddenly end up in this really calm environment, you're kind of thrown off guard. It's not startling, right? But it's just kind of disorienting. So there's a lot of nuance in that emotion and effect that the music can create based on the order that they come in.
I'm gonna ask for an opinion. So there are some video games made by, like, for example, From Software, the Soulsborne games, where there's no music at all when you're wandering, but only whenever you're in those fights. What are your thoughts on games like that?
That's a chapter of my dissertation that I have not written yet. So my first inclination is that the environmental sounds that are there, the sound effects, are what create the immersion in the like normal, just like exploration mode. And then the fact that the music only exists in those boss fights makes it that much more marked, that much more important that it's there. So it creates more of an effect. But that's, again, I haven't gotten through the game yet, so I can't really speak to it too much. That's going to be in the dissertation, though.
I'm just curious, have you, when it comes to video game soundtracks, looked at any, like, strategy games at all? Like, how some, like, are, I guess you're not, like, fighting a battle just yet, or not, like, trying to think of, like, games, like, you could say Civ is one.
Yeah, I Civ 5 and 6.
I don't know if you've ever heard of, like, the Total War series or anything like that. Yeah. Like, how some of them, whenever, like, armies are marching together, it's, like, it's calm, yet slightly, like, building up until, like, they clash together in, like, battles. I don't know if you ever looked at any of those, but
Yeah,
those soundtracks are amazing, like.
those soundtracks are really cool. I haven't written about that effect specifically, but that like calm before the storm, that eerie kind of like, everybody's mad at you, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's definitely reflected in the music. Specifically, what I looked at in Civ 6 in my master's thesis was how the music develops over time. Because they have the same theme that like starts off with this really monophonic, easy, like in the ancient era, one instrument, and then it gets more and more complex and a larger texture as you move on through the eras. Then once you get to like the future technology, it starts putting in like electronic music, which is pretty cool.
I know some of them are like historical strategy and stuff, and like I've seen some where I think they use like, I don't want to say exactly period accurate instruments, but they use something kind of similar to that. I think it really adds just like a funny texture.
Yeah, the fact that it develops over time adds to the narrative, but also the fact that it is quasi-historically accurate, as historically accurate as media can be. It also like adds to your feeling in the moment. Yeah. Okay, there's two people in the back corner, and I can't really point because there's two of you.
So I have kind of two questions. First of all, were there any interesting parallels you noticed in that big spreadsheet you had of like this music started and then the player did this certain action, like outside of code-based stuff that the game would like sunset, sunrise stuff. And then my other question is, did you also include like the jukebox music that you like, the music disc? Was that also part of your analysis?
I'll start with your second question. That was not part of my analysis. I was working specifically with non-diegetic music or music that is not occurring to the avatar. I'm going to add that in with this new, with the 1.19 update. I'm adding in the like custom discs and the sculpt sensors and stuff like that for my dissertation. In terms of the first question, things that like kind of randomly occurred, there was at one point where, what's the word? So the player was digging a giant hole and stuffing a bunch of chickens into it.
Yeah, chicken corn.
Okay, whatever. Whatever makes you happy. But then like the music cued, and you can see the player just like stop what he was doing, and it's like almost reflecting on like, what am I doing? I'm filling this 16 block hole by 16 block hole with chickens. Right? So it was more of the effect that it had on the player than actually the congruence in the game that really I noticed. Yeah.
So do you, in your analysis, do you find like certain games, like I know, like Resident Evil, I play a lot of the time, I go back to like the reboots and stuff, and a lot of the time there's no constant music in the back. It's more or less the stingers that you talk about, where it's like you can hear the giant Mr. X dude walking around upstairs, and you're like, oh my god. Is that a part of that kind of, is that a variable in your analysis where it's like, well, some games don't have this ambient music, but they have these big grand stinger moments that are crucial too?
Yes, that's absolutely part of it. So part of what I'm doing, one section of my dissertation is specifically open world games. And so I have games where the music only occurs during boss fights, music where it's ever present, or mostly ever present. I don't think there's any games where it's like constantly there, but it's almost always kind of just a background thing that helps to set the mood. And then a kind of a middle ground where the music is not unusual when it appears, but it's more like a 50-50 balance of when there's music and when there's just the sound effects. And I have not gotten to the like in-person studies on that yet because COVID put a little bit of damper on that. So I can't speak to how specific people other than myself will respond, but my inclination is that especially after the first, let's say, chapter of the game, you start to expect something from the game itself, as opposed to just your general knowledge of video games. So once you've categorized in your mind which experience you're expecting, you're more likely to expect that experience. Imagine that. You're more likely to expect what you're expecting. So once you've categorized it into, oh, this is one of those games where the music never happens, then you know that the music is going to be that much more effective when it does. In Minecraft, where it's kind of not just random, but also unbalanced, where, so we can see, yeah, you can actually see, I can hardly see. You can see here on this like start time that some of them had, 5 minutes between them. Some of them had, maybe it's a different slide, sorry. Some of them had like 5 minutes between them. Some of them had 15 minutes between them. So there was a lot of variation in when the music actually occurred, which, do I not have this on here? Oh, that's a bummer. There was a lot of variation in the amount of duration between music, and that, because it wasn't tied to a game action, created a little bit of a disjunct or dissonance in what was going on. Yeah.
How would you categorize Doom? Have you played Doom?
I have not played Doom.
Do you know what it is?
I know what it is, but I don't know enough about the music to categorize it.
It's just like all heavy metal. And it's very like, that's my favorite game soundtrack ever.
Okay.
And I think that part of it, it feels like it plays all the time, pretty much. And if it's not like an actual like driving song, there's always like ambiance, and it's also put into the game soundtrack. So I think that, I just didn't know how to categorize that.
The idea I get from what you're describing is that it's one of those games where the soundtrack sets the mood more than it gives you specific in-game information about like what's going to happen next. But that's what I'm getting from what you're saying, but I haven't played it myself. Ben.
Have you done much work with, or I guess research on film music?
Yes.
Okay, what's your favorite soundtrack for film music?
My favorite soundtrack for film music? Lord of the Rings.
Have you found like a hierarchy of efficacy between musical cues and engagement in a game? Like the more musical cues, like at what point it falls off to where it's okay, well there's too many cues, so it's no longer actively helping your experience, it's actually hindering it and taking it out of it because every single thing they do has a cue.
Yeah, that's definitely something that happens, and I don't have a specific, ceiling for that. That's something that I'm going to add into my notes because that's really interesting. Like, where does that effect of you don't feel your socks actually start when it comes to video games? Good question. One more, or two, or no. Oh, Hannah.
So essentially, my favorite video game soundtrack is No Man's Sky with Furnace Universe. And what's unfortunate is I've found listening to the soundtrack is more enjoyable than actually playing the game.
Yeah.
I've noticed that the pieces in the soundtrack are never found in their entirety during the game.
That's something that happens in Minecraft as well.
I was going to ask,
Yeah.
does this happen in Minecraft?
That definitely happens in Minecraft, where the album music does not match up with what's actually happening on screen, which is why the transcriptions that I didn't show you for this one, they are taken from actual in-game recordings as opposed to from the soundtrack, the album. And there has to be a differentiation when you're writing about video games. Are you talking about the album, or are you talking about what actually happened in your experience and these recordings? So yeah, it's like a technical, at the beginning of the paper, you have to say, I'm talking about this, but not this, and then you move on with your life.
So with the last couple of updates adding a lot of new cave biomes, are you going to update your dissertation or are you going to do it based off of what we started?
So I wrote this paper in the spring, but I was basing it off of the 1.16 update, because that's just where I was at. I didn't want to do it on the partial 1.17 update because that would be dumb. So I stuck with 1.16. I'm definitely going to update it for 1.19. I was hesitant at first. I wasn't really sure because with the caves and cliffs, the sound isn't really affected. You don't have that the environmental, the acoustics that you would expect in a cave, right? There's mods that do that, and I'm talking about mods that create that ambiance. But with 1.19 having the proximity effect with the skull sensors, I'm definitely adding that in. So it's an added step and an added month of work, but they're going to keep paying me to write a dissertation, so I'm not going to rush through it.
One more? You good?
Thank you, Professor Griffin. You guys are so lucky to go to school here. You have such cool professors. The original Zelda soundtrack. You kept saying I played the original Zelda when it was like a little box and then 64. June 4th, 1989. That's when I beat Zelda for the first time. Yes, okay.
That was before I had it on my mom's old NES.
Yeah, you guys weren't alive. So,
I wasn't alive, sorry.
yeah, I know, you weren't alive. I just want to, but y'all listen, I want to say one other thing, and I don't want to bring the mood down because this is often thing, but I just want to remind you this because we have had some issues with this. Midterm is the point where the semester starts to get really stressful, right? So if you ever get to that point, and I just want to say this and I'll remind you, where you start to think that you can't handle this and you think about harming yourself, I want to remind you that the Bucks Press 2, if you don't remember the number, it's in the ETSU app, click on Bucks Care, click on mental health, and call. Or if you can't find that, we now have the National Suicide Line, which is 988. You can call it anytime. And I think you all know some things happened in the past 10 days, and I just don't want anybody to get to that point. The semester gets stressful, but I'll tell you what, it's college, y'all. And I know it seems like it's so important. It is not worth hurting yourself, okay? So if you get to that point in your semester, do something and ask, all right? So don't let that happen to you. And if you really just come talk to any of us, any of our professors, we can help you. But don't forget that those resources are there. And I hope that over fall break, we can all de-stress a little bit. So if you are feeling that crunch, you get out of that mood and come back and we're gonna get this. But don't let college overwhelm you. You're gonna be fine, I promise. All right.
Therapy is cool.
Yes.
Yeah.